The NFL is the ultimate what have you done for me lately league, and teams have to prove themselves each and every week. And we are now 12 weeks into the season, and the playoff picture is really starting to form. We are going to discuss a few teams in today's video that, barring a catastrophic collapse to end their year, these teams will be playing meaningful football in January. And just because you get to the playoffs doesn't mean you're entitled to winning playoff games or are going to be a playoff regular. I like the outlook for each of the teams we're going to discuss in today's video for the remainder of the 2023 regular season, and each team will probably win double-digit games. But when you get to the playoffs, everything is thrown out the window because the only thing that matters is the next 60 minutes of football. There are narratives around each of the teams in today's video, and they each have their fair share of critics, and we're going to break them all down. Now let's begin. And we are starting today's video with the Detroit Lions, who are 8-3 on the year and most recently lost to the Green Bay Packers on Thanksgiving Day. After this loss, everyone was getting their jokes in, and it was the Lions losing on Thanksgiving is a tale old as time, and the classic same old Lions, and you get the point. But they're 8-3 for a reason, and it's because they are a good team. They're top 8 in EPA, and it's due in large part to how well their offense is orchestrated. Offensive coordinator Ben Johnson does a phenomenal job as the team's play caller, and one thing I like in particular that Johnson does is he'll call a play-action dagger concept, and what that does schematically speaking is the play-action draws the linebackers down further into the box near the line of scrimmage, all while a player like Amon-Ra St. Brown is running a deep dig across the middle, and because the linebackers are sucked down into the box, a lot of the time it creates a nice open window for Jared Goff to throw. There's a reason the Lions have put up 20 or more points in all of their games but one this year, and it's because they can attack you with any skill player they have, and if you want to try and eliminate one of their weapons, that's fine because they can and will go elsewhere. The one thing they will have to prove in the playoffs this year is that they can beat other contending teams when it matters. This has been in the works for a few years now, dating back to the day Dan Campbell was hired. We discussed how culture can turn a franchise around last week and used the Lions as an example of how a positive culture can turn your franchise around, and the Bears as a negative example of how culture can keep your franchise in the dumps. And sure, the Lions lost to Green Bay on Thanksgiving, but with several days to process this loss and to reasonably discuss this game, my only real takeaway is the Lions have to do a better job of helping themselves when push comes to shove. This team has 17 turnovers in 11 games, and 7 of those 17, or 41% of the turnovers they have offensively in 2023, have come in 2 of the 11 games they've played. And the good news for Detroit is their next 2 games are against the Saints and Bears, meaning teams they should beat. Their final 4 games could end up being against 4 playoff teams in the Broncos, the Vikings twice, and the Cowboys, and those 4 games for the Lions are going to be a real test before the playoffs start. Believe it or not, the Lions are second in the NFL in yards offensively and have 350 or more yards in 9 of their 11 games. Teams go through turnover spurts, and I'm not worried that the Lions are going to have 3 turnovers per game for the remainder of the 2023 season. They will figure that part out, and very quietly, Detroit is top 5 in rushing yards, rushing touchdowns, and yards per carry as a team. And nobody is going to want to play David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs behind that big bruising offensive line. But the other side of the ball is cause for concern, and I do worry about the Lions' defense and how they will fare in the playoffs against the best the NFC has to offer. Aiden Hutchinson is 3rd in the NFL in pressures, but outside of Hutch, the Lions don't have a legit number 2 guy to get after the quarterback. Aleem McNeil is 2nd on the team in pressures by a wide margin, as Hutch has 63 on the year to McNeil's 30 on the year. Their secondary has also allowed 19 passing touchdowns, which ranks 28th in the NFL. And there were 2 games this year where they allowed 6 total points, and those were games against the Falcons and Bucks. And needless to say, the Lions' game plan of slowing down the run against those teams and forcing Desmond Ridder and Baker Mayfield to beat you isn't going to be the same as forcing Brock Purdy and the 49ers or Jalen Hurts and the Eagles to beat you. We have discussed the concerns about the Lions playing running quarterbacks on the channel before, and that is very much much a concern for them in the postseason, and that too is something they will have to prove in January. This team has done pretty much everything correctly in the rebuild, which started back in January of 2021. But the wait is over, and now it's time to prove what the future of Lions football is all about. Go in the North and go in the first playoff game in the Dan Campbell era. Next up is the Miami Dolphins, who look to be in the driver's seat relative to the AFC East after the Bills fell to 6-6. They are 8-3 on the year, and what's important to remember with the Dolphins is who their losses have been to. They didn't accidentally drop one to New England or to the Giants or to any other team with a top 5 or 10 draft pick. No. Their losses have been to the Buffalo Bills, the Philadelphia Eagles, and the Kansas City Chiefs. And sure, the Bills are 6-6 and they may not make the playoffs this year, but they're not a team anybody takes lightly. Even if you are the biggest Bills hater on the planet, you can acknowledge how good they are when they're on. And Miami certainly found that out back in Week 4, as Buffalo would go on to put up 48 points and win by 4 scores. And Miami's next 3 games are games they will probably win, as they play the Commanders, Titans, and Jets, which would set them up with a game against the Cowboys on Christmas Eve with an 11-3 record. And when Washington is on offensively, they are a very good unit, and there is a chance this game is close against the Dolphins, but I fully expect Miami to take care of business against the Titans and Jets in weeks 14 and 15, and comfortably. I think we know where this is going with Miami and what they have to prove, and it's that they have to beat good teams. It's one thing to beat the Tim Boyle-led Jets on Black Friday by 21 points, while holding the Jets to 159 yards of total offense and only allowing 6 points defensively, as Tua did throw a pick 6 in this game, but it's another to beat Patrick Mahomes in January. And because the Dolphins are 8-3 with what I think are 3 very winnable games in the next 3, the 1 seed is not out of the question for them. But the final 3 games of the year for Miami are going to be very fun games for fans to watch, as they play the aforementioned Cowboys in Baltimore on New Year's Eve and home against Buffalo to close out the regular season. And it's not the end of the world if Miami doesn't get the number 1 seed, but I think there is reason to worry if they end up going 0-3 in the final 3 games of the year. I love head coach Mike McDaniel, and I think what he's doing offensively with the Dolphins will gradually be stolen by other offensive coaches across the league the next few years, and that he is the first to set the trend in a new era of offense. But there's a difference between putting up 70 on the Broncos in Week 3 and 14 points against the Chiefs. And for what it's worth, the Broncos are a much different team in late November than they were when these teams played well over 2 months ago. The Dolphins are technically 0-1 in the playoffs under McDaniel, though I do let that loss slide, as last year's wildcard playoff game was when they started Skylar Thompson in Buffalo. And just being honest, I think the Dolphins even keeping that to a 1-score game, considering the circumstances, was a pretty big win for them in itself. But if Tua plays the rest of the year and plays all 17 games and is the starting quarterback for them this time around, it's a much different story. They need to win at least 1, if not 2 playoff games this year. Losing Jalen Phillips for the year is absolutely brutal, as Jalen was probably going to notch his first double-digit sack season of his career at 24 years old. I don't want this to come across like losing Phillips is insignificant, because it's obviously not, but the Dolphins aren't the first and certainly won't be the last team affected by injuries, especially this year. But for all the praise Miami's offense has received this year, and rightfully so when you have a legitimate MVP candidate in Tyreek Hill at receiver, one thing they are going to have to work on over the final 6 games is turnovers. This doesn't get discussed by the national media because of the success they've had offensively and because they are 3rd in EPA per play, but they're 24th in turnovers. Sure, they've put up 54 points in the last 2 games, which equates to 27 per contest, but they've committed 3 turnovers in each of the last 2 games, and Miami has committed at least 1 turnover in every game this year, minus the 70-point game against Denver. They have a -5 turnover margin on the year, and despite everything right Miami has done this year, and all of the progress Tua has made as their quarterback and a guy who's earned a contract extension, he is 4th in the NFL in interceptions, and this needs to be addressed before the playoffs start. We are crossing the Gulf of Mexico to the Lone Star State for the next team, and it's the Dallas Cowboys. The Cowboys are 1st in points per game, as they are averaging a staggering 31.5 per game, and they are 4th in points per game defensively, as they are allowing an average of just 16.8 points per game. And I've seen Cowboys fans in the comments recently talking about how we need to show them more love, and guys, buckle up, this is your segment. Dallas has not 4, not 5, not 6, but 7 20-plus point wins in 2023. That alone is very impressive, and they have 5 games with 38 points or more. They have committed just 10 turnovers in 11 games, and like we mentioned during the Lions segment, the turnover spurt that teams go through, well, Dallas had one bad game with turnovers, which of course was against San Francisco in Week 5. They had 4 turnovers in that game, and in the remaining 10 games, they are 8-2 and have outscored their opponents with an average of 34-14. There was a lot of concern with the Cowboys offense and how they would fare without now Chargers offensive coordinator Kellen Moore in 2023, and they have passed with flying colors. They are 5th in passing yards, 1st in passing touchdowns, and in the upper half of most rushing categories. They are also in the top 7 of the entire league in EPA per play offensively, and are second to only the Browns in defensive EPA per play. Corner Deron Bland is having an absolutely insane season and has 5 defensive touchdowns and 5 pick sixes, which is already an NFL record. And believe it or not, Deron is second on the team in touchdowns, only to CeeDee Lamb, who has 6 receiving touchdowns on the year and is already over 1,000 yards in just 11 games. Simply put, this team is one of the best in the league, and they could be in line for their 3rd straight 12-win season, and the only team to match them during this span is the Kansas City Chiefs. But, like we always say with those beloved Cowboys, they have one thing to prove this postseason, and that's to win. Dallas plays the Seahawks on Thursday in Week 13, and I think they'll improve to 9-3, and with some help from their friends in San Francisco, maybe they'll get the division rival Eagles to lose and play Philly at home in Week 14, with a chance for both teams to have 10-3 records through 13 games. There is a non-zero chance the Cowboys finish the year with the number 1 seed in the NFC. Granted, it's small because the Cowboys have virtually no room for error, but it can be done. They have a very tough 4 or 5 game stretch coming up, depending on whether you want to include the Seahawks in that span. Their next 5 games are on the screen, and Dallas can win all of these games. It's one thing to be optimistic about a team, and I do this with teams like the Bucs, for example, who have talent on the roster but often lose games, but there's no game Dallas can't win. Period. I don't look at the Cowboys' schedule and immediately circle losses for them the way you may if the Panthers were heading into Kansas City in the next few weeks. Dak Prescott is second in the NFL in passing touchdowns and is only behind Josh Allen. Dak takes a lot of heat, but if he leads this team to the NFC Championship game for the first time since 1995, a lot of the heat can be diminished. Micah Parsons is leading the NFL in pressures, and the Cowboys have 5 players with 24 or more pressures. This team can get after the quarterback in any circumstance, and the way they play can and will translate to January. I really think this team will win at least one playoff game, but after that, it's going to be very interesting to see how this all plays out. Every game between the Cowboys and Eagles is a toss-up, and only one team can win the division. But there's a very real chance we see the Cowboys and Eagles meet for a 3rd time in 2023. And if they do, with everything that would be on the line, that would be far and away the biggest game of Dak Prescott's career, and he would have the opportunity to shut everyone up. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, please like and subscribe, as only about 28% of people watching are subscribed, and it helps the channel tremendously. Until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.